Well, welcome back to Exploring the Bible Together. I am Pastor Paul Miller here with
Pastor Jake Fain.
And I'm Deacon Andrew Moore.
We're continuing this series on what's called the Shema, this very key verse that includes the great commandment to love the Lord. With great help from these folks at the Bible Project, going into depth with almost each of the key words of that verse. Right now, we're going to hear a little bit more about loving the Lord with all our heart. So here's the video.
For thousands of years, every morning and evening, Jewish people have prayed these well-known words as a way of expressing their devotion to God. They're called the Shema. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. And as for you, you shall love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, and with all of your strength. We're going to look at the fourth key word in this prayer, heart, which in Hebrew is sometimes pronounced levav, or more often in a shorter form, lev. Now, different cultures throughout history have had different conceptions of how the human body works, and this is also true of the ancient Israelite writers of the Bible. They knew that the heart was an organ in the chest that sustains life. There's mention of a heart attack in the Bible, Naval, whose heart died inside of him and he became like stone. But the biblical authors talk about the heart in many other ways that might seem strange to modern readers, and that's because these Israelites had no concept of the brain or any word for it. They imagined that all of a human's intellectual activity takes place in the heart. For example, you know with your heart in the Bible. Your heart is where you understand and make connections. In the book of Proverbs, wisdom dwells in the heart. And your heart is what you use to discern between truth and error, like Solomon did when he was king. So the heart is where you think and make sense of the world, and it's where you do more. In the Bible, the heart is where you feel emotions. You feel pain in your heart, like Hannah did when she couldn't have any children. In fact, the phrase a broken heart comes from ancient biblical Hebrew. You also experience fear in your heart. Your heart can melt or be distressed. Your heart can even be depressed. But then on the flip side, your heart is where you experience joy. In Hebrew, to be happy is to be good of heart, or to have a heart of joy. So the heart is the generator of physical life. It's also the center of your intellectual and emotional life, and there's more. In biblical Hebrew, the heart is where you make choices motivated by your desires. So David had it in his heart to build a temple for God. Your heart is where your affections are centered. They're called the desires of your heart. And if you really want something and go after it, it's like what Nathan said to David, whatever's in your heart, go and do it. So then, in the Bible, the heart is the center of all parts of human existence, as in the well-known proverb, guard your heart, because from it flows your whole life. Now, the prophet Jeremiah believed that the human heart was fundamentally broken. He said, the heart of a human is deceitful above all, irreversibly sick. Who can even understand it? He had watched a whole generation turn away from God. They started sacrificing their children as if that were a good thing. So this is why, in the imagination of the Hebrew prophets, the only hope for humanity is the total renewal of the human heart. Moses predicted that if Israel was ever going to love their God, their heart would need to be circumcised, which is a very vivid and surprising metaphor about removing evil and stubbornness from the human heart. David, after he committed murder and adultery, pleads with God to create in me a pure heart. The prophet Ezekiel hoped for a day when God would remove the heart of stone and give his people a new heart of soft flesh, which is very similar to Jeremiah's hope that God would write the commands of the Torah on the hearts of his people. And that brings us all the way back to the Shema. Every day, God's people are called to devote to God their whole body and mind, their feelings and their desires, their future and their failures. This is what it means to love the Lord your God with all of your heart.
All right, welcome back. I hope that video was helpful. When I watch these, I'm reminded so much of what we've been trained to think in terms of a Greek way of thinking versus a Hebraic way of thinking. And, we tend to be Westerners who divide the world up into mind, body, and spirit. That language comes easily for us because that's what we've been trained in culturally. But when we look at the Old Testament, when we look at biblical language, sometimes we have to leave some of that behind. And I think that's why these terms are so important for us. Because, as the video mentioned, when the Bible is talking about the heart, it's not just talking about feelings, although that's important and a part of who we are and how we work as humanity. But when you're called to love the Lord with all your heart, that also means all of our thinking, all of the way that our whole selves of who we are, and create in me a new heart. I love that the video showed all these different scriptures and ways that heart is used. There are many times and instances where you're going to run into this heart language in the Bible. And sometimes it is going to be when people have heart-wrenching moments where there's sadness or joy. But other times, what does it mean to know the Lord with your heart? What does it mean to know someone with your heart? To have this sort of love and connection to someone. It's also connected some of what goes on up here in our minds as well. I don't know. What did you guys hear from that?
It made me want to do a Google search or like go to Bible Gateway and just type in the word heart, enter, and then just see what pops up and realize just how many times that word shows up in the Hebrew Bible and all these different ways that it's used. I mean, talk about a rich image, metaphor, symbol, but also source of meaning and understanding for the Hebrew people. And then, of course, from there, moving into, from Judaism into Christianity. But just this, so broad brush ways of how heart is used to really talk about many different parts of our lives. And I think that it really helped me to realize that we can't dissect things in neat categories when we're talking about ancient Israel and Hebrew culture and Judaism. Things just don't fit in little boxes. There's a lot of shared meaning. When we talk about the next couple of videos, we talk about not only loving God with our heart, but then our soul and our strength. There's going to be some blending across those where it's not like, okay, this is this part of your body, and then this is this part of your body, and then this, that compartmentalized sort of, dissecting ourselves into components. It's much more holistic, and it's much more both nuanced than that, and it's also much broader than that.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I love the ways that this heart language has carried over into English. It's fascinating. We just had, not too long ago, the 500th anniversary of the King James translation. So the first really widely circulated English translation of the Bible. And there are a lot of phrases that show up in English at that point because of the Bible. So the desires of your heart and a broken heart. Some of that heart language we can get because it's pervaded English language. Even people who've never read the Bible know these phrases and know what they mean. But I think you're right, Jake. We're trained to think like the Greeks who break things down. This is how you understand something. You break it down, right? And then you understand the parts, and then you can understand the whole, which works for a lot of things. Good for them. I mean, hey, but the Hebrew witness is the unity that people are one, and you start breaking it down. We're greater than the sum of our parts is the Hebrew witness, So especially the way we would say, well, did you go with your head or with your heart on this one? That would have made no sense to them, right? And the heart is the thing that desires, that decides. And so when we love God with that, I think one of the best translations for heart that makes sense to us, your heart is, although this is going to work for soul too, but if we're talking about what's at the core of you. The core of you. I mean, when they talked about heart, they knew where it was located and used that to represent what's at the core of a person. So yeah, that sense, if we're going to love God with our whole selves, especially with that core, that's what guides us. That is our North Star and our decision maker and all those things.
Well, and there's something to when you read those Old Testament texts now and you see that word heart, and you're going to see this reoccurring theme of renewal of the heart, right? Creating me a clean heart, oh God, those types of things. That there's a nuance there that you're not just talking about, I feel bad today, right? Which you might. That's okay to be uplifted once again. but to think about how our thinking is totally off base, or how we don't know God, or how we've misplaced our trust and our hopes and our whole being in something else. Renewing our hearts is pulling those pieces, that whole totality of who we are, and centering it once again on that Creator who made a clean heart for us, our whole selves. That's a holistic approach to what it means to read the Bible and to love the Lord your God with all of your heart, all of who you are, both knowing, feeling, thinking, all of those aspects.
Well, and here's, oh, go ahead.
Makes me think about when we talk about that, create in me a clean heart or cleanse my heart, that it really gets down to this idea, or circumcise the heart. I love that they talk about that, because it gets down to the concept of, for Judaism, of purification and things being purified, that there's good inside and underneath. There may be some things that are not good also that need to be purified away, kind of the refiner's fire image, that it's not that a person is all one or the other. It's that we are a mixture, a combination, and what we're praying for is for renewal, for cleansing, for purification, because at the core of who we are created in the image of God, and that's good. That's very good, the Bible tells us. But the things that impede that are the things that need to be cleaned and purified away. So as we pray, create in me a clean heart, we're not asking for a new heart. We're saying, purify away those things that separate me from you, God, so that I can be at the essence who you created me to be.
I love the way these guys can do a visual sermon while they're also teaching us. I mean, in some ways, the voice is the teacher and the pictures are the sermon. Mm-hmm. When you watch these videos, which is really a neat way to do things. But the image I'll never forget, of course, we don't know what the tablets look like, but we always draw them as, square on the bottom, rounded on the top. These are the tablets of the law, the commandments, right? And the way we draw hearts, that doesn't look like a real heart, but we know that symbol for a heart. And they took those two commandments with their rounded tops and just lined them up to make a heart. And Jeremiah says, write your law on our hearts. So we won't have to even remind each other and say, know the Lord, and so on. That's going to stick with me, is like, what's the law for? I mean, just, there's so much interpretation happening in that little picture they did. What's the law for? Let our hearts be shaped for the law is the dream of the prophets. Pretty cool. The one thing, it's a little bit Bible trivia, but it's actually kind of important. When we find this verse, the Shema, quoted in the New Testament, it's slightly different than what we read here. And I think the reason may be what we've been talking about, is that for the Hebrew, the heart is the core. It's where you think, it's where you decide. But by the New Testament times, a lot of the Jews and believers in God are Greek speakers and so on. And so you get the verse that many of us may have memorized rather than the actual Shema, because Jesus quotes it this way in the Gospels: love the Lord with all your heart and all your soul and all your mind and all your strength. Mind has to get put in there because they've thought of that as a separate thing. Well, we better love the Lord our God with all of that too. But I wonder if that's why that gets changed in New Testament times, is because they start thinking of the heart in a more limited way and need to say, yeah, mind too, in Greek. And that just says all kinds of things about how do we translate these core beliefs into a new thought system, into a new language. I mean, I don't know if I'd feel like I had the freedom to add something to the list of this verse, but somebody did. To get at the real meaning of the verse, they needed to include that.
And it's a great reminder why we do word studies and things like that, and look at language. Is why we're having a Bible study today, is to say, look, these things develop over time. Even from Old Testament to New Testament, you see these nuances. What kind of nuances are in the 21st century right now as words change and develop over time? We look at them. I think the Bible Project is very good at tracing those themes, between David and Ezekiel and Jeremiah, like they had many different ways in which the word was used. And then we get to the New Testament and Jesus is already using it slightly different. How do we use these words today? What does it mean when to say for you to love the Lord your God with all your heart? Think about your reaction to what that might mean, or someone who might hear it for the first time. Part of what we're trying to do today is to recognize that loving the Lord your God with all your heart is not limiting it to one aspect of who you are, just a feelings relationship. You go to worship and you want to feel connected to God, and that's good. That can be helpful. But loving the Lord your God with all your heart means with all of who you are. And so what pieces might be missing, right? What's that holistic way that we're called to be in deep, loving relationship with the Lord, who, by the way, loves us with all God's heart?
And then Jesus says, for wherever your treasure lies, there you shall find your heart. Oh, great discussion. How about we pray? Good and gracious and loving God, God of our hearts, you have created us in such a wonderful and amazing way. To be in your image is something we have a hard time understanding, but maybe this word heart helps us to get a little closer to what that really is like, that sense of wholeness of our being. And we give you thanks for all of the ways that you have so richly and beautifully worked through language and cultures to express these concepts, and just pray that we can continue to learn and grow, that these words and these concepts can renew and inform and enrich our faith as well. So as we seek to be your people and to love you with all our heart, we pray that you would be with us and encourage us and strengthen us to do just that. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Somebody's on the phone.
That's God calling us.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us today. Next session, we'll talk about the word soul. So love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul next. And we look forward to that conversation as well. And just the anticipation of how that's just going to blow our minds as well, just like these have been. So hopefully you've enjoyed them as much as we have. And we'll see y'all next time.